All right. I feel proud and special here as one of the few vendors that have been invited to speak here. So just a quick background on myself. If you can't tell, I'm not from this area. I'm a dumb American. I come from California. And what's also interesting is you may see me as Microsoft, but I spent the first half of my career working for Microsoft's competition. My joke here is I outlasted Ballmer because I'm a founding member of the Unix user group, the Linux user group at UCLA. I tried to make hardware in a day that Microsoft explicitly said we don't do hardware. I started a company that tried to hire me, although it didn't work for the first 3 times, to work on security when Microsoft meant insecure. And I also joined what was formerly called the Server and Tools group, when if you polled 100 people out there in the audience, 99 of them would say, oh, you just make Windows and Office. Server what? Right. I'm tremendously proud of the progress this company has made. And something that is interesting and unique that most people don't think about is if you rewind the clock 20 years and look at the S&P 500 or the top 10 tech companies, there's only one company that has managed to hang around near the top. I'm not going to say the top, but near the top over a long period of time. And it's because we have figured some interesting things out. And if you've heard Satya talk about innovation, he talks about it as a track record. Because we can all name many, many failures. There was a moment in time, not too long ago, we were the #1 smartphone OS maker in the world. That was a mere 5 to 7 years ago, by the way. And then $12 billion later, we're nowhere. But on the upside, I joined a company that had no database. We did not make a database. Yet if you say SQL Server out there, you're not going to get a double look. We're the flip side. We're sort of common there. I used to work for a company that no longer exists, Sun Microsystems. Put out of business primarily because of Microsoft and many other companies out there. So what actually matters when it comes to innovation, to a large extent, is track record. And there's a couple of interesting things if you think about it. I'll add addendum to Neil's conversation. I do believe innovation can work if you do it the right way. And I also have another position, which is innovation now matters. And what's so different about now versus 5 or 10 years ago? Now, you're not going to know what most of these are. But just to give you an idea of all the things that we take for granted, the first calculator, 1877, it's a mechanical calculator that you moved about 10 pins around and you cranked it. Right? That was called the Grant calculator. It happened in 1877. It took a long time before calculators became actually usable. Right? The AT&T Voter, this was a scary machine. It was kind of like a piano interface, and IBM did it, and it could create words if you had a talented piano player evoke the sounds of a human being. The early days of the verbalization using an electric voice. Shaky Robot, first time they integrated a lot of these technologies where you could type into this scary-looking functional robot with a keyboard and asked it to do things like move blocks from here to here. And it was not just the integration of technology, it brought together a machine that understood text, was smart, made its own independent decisions. If you put a block in front of it, it had 2 really crappy cameras that noticed that there was something in my way and figured out, hey, I should go around this on my journey to moving those blocks. And one of my favorites, I'm going to skip the voice recognition, we're all super familiar with things like that, is the VAMP self-driving machine. Mercedes had been doing this for about 10 years, and they tested in 1994 a machine onto the Autobahn that was driving by itself, a test machine and a couple of E-Series. They've had this technology all along for 10 years. And now it's become quite interesting such that every vendor is out there transforming the world. But there's a lot of these things that are actually quite common in one area and why innovation matters right now. I know Neil talked about don't think about technology. I'll take a slightly contrarian stance on that one. I would say you should think about technology as a part of your innovation lab and innovation process, and here's why. There's certain trends that make it such that this time frame is a very, very unique and important one. It's because of those 3 things there. Big data, although it's a completely overloaded word. I'll just call it, you actually have access to all the data you've already been generating. I think people forget that even your mobile phone is actually an IoT device. It's actually probably the most pricey expensive, and powerful IoT device. I've never seen so many iPhone X's in my life here, except in Singapore. Compute power, right? The ability to now finally reason over that data is unique. It's also available at your fingertips because of cloud computing, right? If you somehow managed to get millions of dollars in the past such that you could buy a giant set of computers, you could do this. And you'd use it once a month, and then it would sit idle, and finance would basically come and shut you down and say, how did this even happen, right? That's no longer the case. And the last thing really is, it's called predictive algorithms. You can call it machine learning. They're the reasons why AI is interesting now. And I'll try not to avoid too much vendor hype, but we do have an interesting strategy around AI. It is not for data scientists, right? That's actually not why Microsoft is building AI. An interesting story I want to tell around that is if you read a lot of the Microsoft stories about AI, it's quite interesting. One of my favorite is there's a teenage girl. Well, she started as a teenage girl. She's 20 now. She's in India. Oh, she's Indian, but living in Nepal, right, of Indian descent. Her family raises cows for a living. And they're very successful in Nepalese terms. They have 40 cows. 7 years ago, as it turns out, a bunch of their cows died because of anthrax. I didn't know cows could get anthrax, but they do, actually, quite often. And her family went through a 7-year slump. Her siblings, the 4 other relatives that they supported, it was not a good time. They were still digging their way out of debt because of that, all because of an outbreak of a disease. And she figured out a way that she could help. It's like, well, it's quite common. They're in a farming community, disease spreads, and she had a problem. Well, how do I prevent this from hurting more families? Prevent disease. If you put a Fitbit onto a cow, you can learn all sorts of interesting things. It turns out you can tell when they're about to reproduce, how often they're walking, they're literally where they walk. Are they going to the water hole? Are they hanging out over here? And she actually applied, never really thinking about algorithms, machine learning to say, hey, if I knew this cow was getting sick, can I look back at the data and see what were indicators leading to that? And it turns out it's quite straightforward, right? You reason over that data set, you learn about cows that get sick, you compare their back-end data, and guess what? 95% detection success rate. Think of what that means to a family that has 40 cows. If you can isolate the one cow that was getting sick to prevent it from spreading. 20-year-old girl from Nepal, right? Not like she had a tremendous data center to play around with. And they learned the hard way. There was no existing data. She started capturing and running it as a project in our Asia Pacific Inspire program, right? And that's just an example of how common it can be if you think about technology in an interesting way. And this is why AI is different, I think. You can pick anything. Cows, machines, water heaters. There are about 100 stories I could tell right now for the next 3 days, all about how artificial intelligence and machine learning as a technology can be used within your innovation lab. So, I will throw something out there because this brings up a whole other set of issues that is very relevant to Microsoft. We don't think about purely just the artificial intelligence technology because it brings along all sorts of negative stuff. There now are basically no games that humans are better than computers at. One of the last ones fell due to a Google lab, right? Go. It was again thought, oh, chess is nothing. There's only 64 moves you can move in every game. Oh my God, the game of Go, right? Thousands of combinations. There's no way to map every move. But guess what? A bunch of computer scientists using machine learning beat the #1 person in the world, handedly. And none of them actually were Go experts. That shows you the power of the ability to work with humanity, right, in order to prove it. And that's actually our stance with regards to AI. It's about reasoning, understanding, and interacting, and applying that model using that technology. But this is not about replacing human jobs. This is actually about amplifying humanity. What never really gets talked about is they had Go coaches. They had gigabytes and terabytes of data sets that were created by humans, right? Recorded, reasoned over. And actually, the smartest gameplay came from alignment and thought with a human. Just like the story of this girl. It didn't remove any jobs. It actually just saved a bunch of lives, livelihoods of people. And we believe that is the way that you need to think about AI and how it applies through it. So interesting about your innovation lab, if you ever asked and if you've ever applied AI, is how is this going to affect the roles at the company? What are actually the roles that will get disrupted by this? And plan for the human aspect of training. And guess what? AI, everybody can learn it, right? Everybody can apply it. And to Neil's point, which I fully agree with, it's about spreading that outside of your lab. I'll tell you where we've seen failure after failure after failure, and that is when the only people who know AI are stuck in an office, right? You're not disrupting crap. You are wasting lots of money, transparently. Now, an easier way to think about innovation, at least in the way Microsoft thinks about it in the context, it's actually all around these four things. You hear us talk about it in terms of digital transformation, but I put this out there to help expand your mind about the types of innovation that are possible. A lot of people focus on transforming product. I'm a back-end server guy, if you haven't noticed. I think that's cool. Make your apps, great, right? But believe it or not, there's massive innovation that can be done about engaging your customers, right? Or even transforming business process. I'm one of those weird unicorns. I love operational innovation. It's also one of the hardest to pull off because you need all sorts of people within the organization to actually work together. And there's a funny story about this, and Ballmer did an amazing thing with this. Microsoft used to be built like GE. I don't know if you guys noticed that about 10, 15 years ago. I used to run a small business, made about $100 million globally. It was one of the first cloud businesses we had, and the only direction that Ballmer ever gave was make sure you're number one, number two in your market, right, the old GE mantra, and I'm here to gather as many $100 million and billion-dollar businesses under the Microsoft umbrella as possible. What did that do? Made 100 companies within a company. And at some point, the stock was not doing very well. Flip over to what we have today. There's really only three, and now actually we just managed to merge even two. There's only two major divisions at Microsoft. Either you're working on what I'll call the modern workplace business, which is all about a user as either an employee or a customer, some productivity worker, right? Devices, operating systems, it's all client computing. Everything else, I hate the name, I'll admit it, it's called cloud and enterprise. We don't only do enterprise, we don't only do cloud, but all it means, everything that is not user-based. That's it. There's only two sides of the company. Now, what is also unique is you'll see the same technology show up in all places, right? Cortana was built by Bing. It's powered by Azure Machine Learning. And guess what? The way most people interact with it is actually through a client operating system, okay? Built by a different group, loaded into Windows. One of my favorite features in Outlook now, and also in PowerPoint, it can detect the topic you're looking for, and again, it calls out to our web services and helps you think about new terms, new technologies, and even offer up templates and information that you may want to create, right? Again, alignment of core technologies across the entire group. So Microsoft has actually gone through the similar transformation. And the thing I'll add is we have many versions of what people can call innovation labs. We have what I call research labs. 2,000 people work for Harris Shum doing nothing but AI research, even working with Google, right, on things like how do we improve machine learning of reading text. We passed a milestone actually just last month. There's a standardized test for reading comprehension. We threw a machine at it after reading 500 Wikipedia articles, and finally, it started beating the average human response. It's both scary and very intriguing. Now I can throw a bunch of documents at a machine learning and hook it up to a chatbot and say, hey, it can probably figure out generic questions with the corpus of data. Is there huge implications for this? Yes. If your only job in life is to understand docs and then hop on a phone and answer it, you don't have much of a career moving forward in the next 10, 20 years, right? But there's still an aspect of, hey, can you be the person that helps enable a capability like that over time and move on to something that's higher value? The answer there obviously is yes. Right. Now, we've done a lot of different, the second example is actually helping other companies with their innovation labs. One of my favorites is actually Rockwell Automation. They have a lab, and if you haven't heard of Rockwell Automation, they're one of the biggest automation companies in the world, but they optimize factories. They use HoloLens to look at all the different machinery that needs to hook together, walk people through envisioning how do you operate machines before they actually get installed, and it is an industry solution, right, where they bring in all sorts of other different technologies to walk people through. And I could go through tons and tons of different examples here. So we actually help customers build innovation labs as well. And then we also have our Microsoft Technology Centers, right, where we help our partners and Microsoft Technologies walk external customers through what is possible, what is the state of possible for your company. Because the interesting thing for us is we actually don't track innovation. If we don't do it, we die. It goes back to Satya's model that there is no respect in the industry for history. It only respects innovation. And if you don't, this company realizes that we're not going to be around, right? The goal of making an impact on our mission to empower people will just fail. Now, this is the biggest thing I want to land. Innovation is actually a system. It's not a lab. And you have to think about it as a system. And there's many, many failures. Number one that we see when someone comes to us, and I was approached by a chief digital officer, I will not name their company, and they kind of went like, hey, I need to build an innovation lab. Microsoft's a technology provider. Can you help us out? And I said, well, okay. What is it about innovation that you're having problems? Well, no, the CEO told us we need to go do this. I work for the CFO. Make it happen. Could not answer the 10 most first basic questions. Well, I say, okay, well, let's say that this innovation lab is super successful. You come up with a great idea that can transform the business. How would you actually make this happen, make it institutionalized in the business? And again, she had no answers, right? So there's a couple of very basic things. You do have to have executive support, but you use it to make sure that there's a process where you can take the innovation or the learnings and make sure it is institutionalized. The second point, this is very Microsoft speak, I apologize, I'm a business person now, not a tech person, but I call it cross-organizational stakeholder management. If the problem you're trying to solve has to do with back-end integration between sales and operations and your partners, wow, you need to have done the homework to make sure you're not just adding a fourth entity into this mix if those three other orgs don't talk to each other. This is one of the biggest problems at Microsoft, right? If you had siloed thinking, imagine trying to convince somebody who worked on Windows all day long, who had sales targets to meet, who had to build a product, who had ship cycles to say, I need to add a feature with AI. It's not going to go anywhere, right? And the last piece is there is an aspect of what I'll call internal training. Now, there's many different ways you can interpret this, but it is about making sure that the innovation itself also is continuous among your stakeholder organizations, especially around things like applying AI, applying machine learning. There is an unlimited opportunity out there in every organization, right? But it can't, again, just be hidden in your lab. Now, the second thing I saw, answers without a problem. And I will admit, Microsoft has had our fair share of these issues. Because sometimes, if you engage a technologist, exactly like what Neil was talking about, they will find what they believe are problems, and they will find answers to these artificial problems. We did a lot of work around flight optimizations for an airline because the airline requested it. And without engaging the account managers, they went straight to this innovation lab and talked to a bunch of engineers who was like, I'm going to apply some AI, machine learning, yada, yada, yada. Well, the upshot was they were extremely successful until they had to present this to the VP of airline operations, who said, this is useless to me. Because if this ever came up in my negotiations with the pilots and with the air stewardesses, I would get crucified. This idea of thinking, hey, we could reroute all these planes, we could do all this great stuff, and it would optimize your operations in the airline, never went anywhere. Because they forgot to actually ask, hey, is this problem even worth solving in the first place, right? Don't ever make that mistake. Your innovation has to be business aligned, obviously. And this is the other thing I've seen. You have to be very, very careful in understanding that you're going to have a lot of failure all over the place, and people cannot be punished for that. A lot of this has to do with aligning your capabilities, but also make sure that it is about a culture change. It's about enabling learning. It's about a teaching environment. Lastly, resourcing. We have the benefit that our labs, the Microsoft Technology Centers, are a part of the largest segment at Microsoft. They are paid out of our enterprise sales organization. So there's no lack of resourcing. If you ever come over to One Marina Bay, that's the best floor. It's the better floor than our offices for normal employees like us. But here's one of my favorite things too. I think people make a mistake in trying to sell what will innovation bring, new business models, optimization. Sometimes you have to take the complete opposite approach. What's your risk modeling for if you don't do this? Because if you look around and it seems like maybe some of your competitors, some of your other folks are innovating in this area, has anyone ever said, hey, what if this whole product line disappears? Or, wow, what if we lost market share? I've never seen that before. Nobody ever actually talks about this product may become irrelevant if we're not providing the right capabilities in the solution. Our competitor will actually build a better product if we don't do this. And this needs to be a part of the conversation as well. I think that's one of the biggest things that I urge you out there to have sort of really as a mindset shift to challenge some of the norms. It's not always about upside. Sometimes about staying relevant, right? Your million, billion-dollar businesses can really, really get disrupted if you don't get on this bandwagon. And sometimes that can spur the executives to say, oh, wow, you're right? And get resourcing that way. Now, that's my end of presentation, but before you applaud, I do want to show a quick video, which I think is always fun. It'll only take about a minute and a half. I think I might need you to hit play if it's on the video slide. And I will end with this.
Our mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. Technology can shape growth, help us be more agile, we can use technology to change, disrupt the landscape of the industries that we participate in. Building technology so that others can build technology and make things happen. Our success is not dependent on our products. It's dependent on the success that our customers, our partners have with our products. It's really not about our ambitions, but it's the application of our ambitions so that we can deliver digital transformation. I want you to envision what difference can you make to shape the world.
Thank you, and we'll be around for any questions afterwards.